And I said, NLP, what's that? And they said, oh, if you're a trainer, it'll make you into an amazing trainer. I thought, okay, so let's have a look at NLP. And then I became really fascinated by the richness of language and how it reveals so much about us. It all starts with understanding. Pay attention to your audience. Whenever you're communicating, you're never communicating for you. You are always communicating for them. And therefore, they need to be the center of your universe if you want to communicate in a really effective way.
Well, Steve, thank you very much for joining me on Success Matters. As we were preparing for the call, I think I called you my guru, and there's many things I've learned from you since we first met, which was probably about 15 years ago. And that was on an NLP course, and it was like a weekend taster course. How did you end up getting interested in NLP, and what was your journey that took you there?
Yeah, it's interesting. I got into NLP, or fell into NLP, because I've been working in a company, and we were myself and a colleague were not happy with what was happening in the company, and we thought there was a values mismatch. And so one day, our favorite habit actually used to go down, on Shad Thames and sit in a cafe in Shad Thames during lunch break. And what we would basically do is talk about everything we were unhappy about with the company. And then if we had our own company, it would be like this and it would be like that. And then one day my friend said to me, my colleague said, well, why don't we? And suddenly we just came up with the idea, well, yes, of course. And we came up with the idea to start a training company in personal and professional development. And we were looking for something niche. And at the time, I didn't really know what NLP was. And a friend of mine, it was the 100th anniversary of my drama school. And I remember standing at the bar after the show and talking to somebody who said they'd just trained in NLP. And I said, NLP, what's that? And they said, oh, if you're a trainer, it'll make you into an amazing trainer. I thought, okay, so let's have a look at NLP. And actually, I saw that Paul McKenna had made something like £1 million off an NLP course. And at the time, we had a lot of business, then that sounds like a good thing to do. It's certainly the wrong reasons to start it. But we investigated NLP, found some courses, and off I went to train in NLP. And what I discovered was NLP and training in NLP was just like training to be an actor, because I trained originally as an actor at the Royal Central School of Speech and Drama. So when I stepped into NLP, for me, it was like stepping back into drama school and getting back into behavioral flexibility and our ability to explore what our full potential is in terms of physically and mentally, which is what NLP is. And really that was the way that I got into it. And it was a happy accident, because I kind of rediscovered that behavioral flexibility that every one of us is capable of through NLP, which was like revisiting drama school, if that makes sense.
Right. Okay. Yeah. And for the benefit of listeners who aren't familiar with NLP, what the acronym stands for and what it is, could you just give us a quick overview of what it is?
Yeah, absolutely. NLP stands for neuro-linguistic programming. And if you break those three components down, neuro is how we access information from the world around us through our neurology. Linguistic is how we attach language to our experience to give it meaning. And programming is our results and patterns of behavior based on the interpretation of our experience, the meaning we've given our experience. And so whatever that software bit is in the middle, giving experience meaning, determines how we act and respond and navigate our way through life. And what NLP does is it gives us loads of tools to look at that subjective experience, because that's the key thing. We are all operating from subjective experience. We are all operating from what something means to us personally. And sometimes that can help us, and sometimes that can be the problem. It can hinder us. And NLP gives us tools to explore how we're creating our sense of the world and what we believe is possible, and do something about it. So if it holds us back. So that's roughly speaking, very big picture, NLP, neuro-linguistic programming.
Okay, that's great. And you said that you were an actor before. So what made you go from acting into business or doing something different?
Yeah, well, I actually fell into business, which is quite interesting. Being an actor, you're constantly in and out of work. So you go do a film job, and then that finishes after a short period of time. You go and do a play, that finishes normally after 7 weeks or so. And in between jobs, what do? And you've still got your rent to pay and stuff like that. So I went and worked in a sales company, and that sales company had an office in South Africa, and it wasn't performing very well. And so they said to me, would you mind going down to South Africa and spending 3 months there and just notice how the office is running and see what recommendations you'd make? And I love traveling, and South Africa is an amazing place. So off I went. So I went for 3 months and stayed for 5 years. And that's how I fell out of acting and into business.
Right. Yeah. That 3 months into 5 years is quite a long stint.
Yeah, it was. Yeah. Yeah. I think the milk went off by the time I got home.
Yeah. Yeah. I'll be back in a couple of weeks' time, and 5 years later, it's still sat in the fridge. You've also done a fair bit of traveling to Brazil, right? Was that in a similar kind of vein, or was that something different?
Yeah. So in various iterations of my life, as we often have various iterations going on in our lives, there was one time when I was working in international trade fairs and helping companies relocate. So I was based in South Africa, taking companies all over the world, and I spent a lot of time in Brazil. And I eventually got married there, and I didn't get married there, but I got married to a Brazilian lady who became my wife, of course, and that started my connection with Brazil. So I've been traveling to Brazil for on and off for the last 20 years, and so I've done work there, but I also go there because I have a family there and friends there as well. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Yeah. So that's pretty interesting. What do you see as a contrast between the way in which language models work between, say, Brazil, South Africa, the UK, Spain, where you live now, and I know you do a fair bit of work in like the Czech Republic and sort of that sort of area. What's different and what's similar?
Well, it's interesting. Language gives us access to experience. If we weren't able to attach language to experience, we wouldn't be able to communicate our ideas. And if you think about the old adage, and I don't know if it's true, but apparently, who is it? It's I've forgotten the name of the people there. Eskimos apparently have so many words for snow, so that they can describe snow in great detail and different types of snow, where we've probably only got three: snow, slush, and ice, probably. Whereas they can describe something in a lot more detail. So, first of all, vocabulary attached to meaning of experience is really what language is all about. And depending on the type of vocabulary we have, that means we're able to experience the world differently too, because we can make sense of it differently. So language actually gives us an enormous access to our experience and making sense of the world. And every language has grammar peculiar to its language. Every language has vocabulary, it has syntax. And so how people express themselves is very different. We have, we talk about Italians and use generalizations that their language is not only very verbal, it's also physical. A lot of Italians, in the generalized sense of Italians, speaking with their hands too, whereas British people are probably a little bit more reserved. And if you think about it, really all that language is a means of communication, communicating ideas, communicating interpretation of the world, communicating beliefs, and so on. And so whatever words you have access to in your language helps you experience that thing. So if your language is missing something, missing a vocabulary to explain something, then you tend not to understand that thing quite so well. So helping people develop a bigger vocabulary around their experience is going to give them a different experience of life.
Okay, that's pretty deep, really. So in order to increase your vocabulary, you've got to do what? Read, meet people, interact with people. What's the kind of recommendation that you would have for that?
Well, it's really interesting because it's not only about languages in different countries. So I speak Portuguese, English, and I don't really speak another language, but even within your own language. So, for example, the English language, if you look at how many people use English to its full extent, or a very shortened version of English, a very sort of diluted version, then also you find that people are able to express themselves differently. So within your own language, I mean, you can, read, you can go to Shakespeare, and you can use more metaphors to describe things. You can increase literally your vocabulary by looking through a dictionary or paying attention to what other people say or finding different ways to express something. Because ultimately, language is about communication. So if I'm communicating an idea to you, I want to find a way that lands, my message lands with you. And you might be different to the next person. So I might find some keys or triggers with one person, but different keys and triggers for another. And the more access I have to express what I want to say by using language in a more varied way, the stronger communicator I'm going to be, the better rapport I'm going to create with an audience. And the more I'll be able to resonate and influence an audience as well. Most communication is about influence in some way, shape, or form. So the more access you have to language, the more access you have really to influence the processing of the people who you're speaking to. And that's a powerful thing to be able to do.
Yeah. And I mean, you've put a bit of emphasis on words there. And as you were talking, I was reminded of one of the courses that I was on with you, which you were running. And I was paired up with a lady who we had like a 5-minute exercise to build rapport. And I can't remember the full exercise. But at the end of it, she said, I wasn't feeling you. And I kind of stopped me in my tracks there as to, well, what do you mean you weren't feeling me? And it was the fact that she was looking for me to use language that had connection to the emotional level, to the heart level, to the guts level. And I was using language which was much more logically structured, I suppose, more logic based. Right. And so there was no rapport. And so I suppose to an extent, it wasn't necessarily having the breadth of words, it was knowing which words to use at the right time with that person to build that rapport, which for me was actually the key takeaway from that whole course, was that everyone sees the world differently. They experience the world differently. And to build that rapport, you've got to meet them where they are rather than expecting them to meet you where you are.
That's a great way of describing it. Rapport is about meeting people where they're at. And for that, you've got to pay attention to where they're at. You've got to understand where they're at. So you ask questions, you listen to what they say, you connect through those means. And what you say is very interesting, because we can have a very formal language. We can talk about things in a reported sense, or we can talk about them in a way where we're really connected to what we're saying. We're re-experiencing the emotions, and we're showing our emotions as we speak. And we talk about things that we find delightful and things that make us feel joyous. And we talk about things that maybe make us feel sad as well. And, the more open we are with other people, the more connection we tend to have too. If somebody isn't revealing very much, you don't really get a sense that you know them very well. And it's harder to know how to communicate with somebody who you can't read. And so part of the skill of using language and communication is understanding. I always use the phrase, understand before you prescribe, to talk almost as if you're talking about doctors. But of course, we're not talking about prescription or prescribing. What we are talking about is understanding before you really communicate in a meaningful way. It's like influence, for example. If I want to influence a group of people, you can't influence what you don't understand. So if I talk about things which influence me, but this audience is not interested in that, I might get inspired by that, but nobody in my audience is going to be inspired by that. So you need to know who you're communicating with and know what their values are, ideally, what their beliefs are, what they care about. And you need to phrase things in terms that mean something to them if you are looking to have your messages land well and be effective, and perhaps to influence. So it all starts with understanding. Pay attention to your audience. Whenever you're communicating, you're never communicating for you. You are always communicating for them. And therefore, they need to be the center of your universe if you want to communicate in a really effective way. Yeah.
That reminds me actually of a little clip I saw this morning on Twitter of Kamala Harris. She was talking to some school children about public speaking. And she said something along the lines of, if you were the person on the Titanic who knew the ship was about to sink, you've got to get that message over to everyone that the ship's about to sink. You need to get your life jackets on, get in the life raft. So that's what the communication is about. Don't think it's not about you. It's about the audience. What do they need to know and what do they need to receive? So that's how I'm processing this in my mind, is that, analogy to what I saw this morning.
Can I just mention something on that? Just because that's really interesting, because for example, when there was the miracle on the Hudson and Captain Sully was putting that aircraft down on the Hudson River, normally when an aircraft is about to have an impact like that, the phrase is brace, brace, brace. And Captain Sully's instruction was brace for impact. And that says far more than brace, brace, brace. I mean, brace, 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 as an audience member, or as a passenger rather, sat at the back of the plane, you're just hearing brace, 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 not really that sure what's going on. But brace for impact, brace for impact. It's only 3 words, but boy, is that effective. And that's similar to what you were just describing. And by the way, I'm in Marbella here, and it's incredibly hot, and there's no air conditioning in this room. So if you see me with sweat, it is because it is extremely hot here. Not that I'm really complaining, but just why there's a river all over my.
Well, no, thank you for joining on a very, very hot evening for you. I wanted to explore the influence part because NLP, when it first kind of hit the world, as it were, there was a large part of potentially being used to influence people to do things that maybe they don't want to do, and kind of a negative connotation to it. So when you talk about influencing others, what do you mean by that, and how do you address that when people say, well, NLP is used to make me do things I don't want to do? Particularly sales training often uses NLP as a kind of like get to the yes rather than letting the customer have that moment to decide.
Well, first and foremost, I'd say anytime you're communicating with another person and you want to persuade them to go to the cinema to see the film you want to see, or to eat the dinner that you want to eat, or whether it's in a sales environment, or whatever it might be, anywhere where we're looking to influence. Influence is about impacting somebody else's model of the world. And there are some very, very powerful tools to help you do that. One of them is NLP, another is rhetoric, for example, and there's all kinds of other tools that you can use for influence. The issue about good versus bad, the issue of win against lose as opposed to win-win, has got nothing to do with NLP, and it's got nothing to do with rhetoric or anything like that. It's check your own ethics. That's the only thing. That these tools are powerful communication tools, full stop. They are powerful communication tools. So the question of influencing for negative reasons is not about the tool at all. They're simply powerful communication tools. It's about the ethics of the person using those tools. And what I would say is, we are bombarded by messages from advertisers, from politicians, from anybody who's looking to influence us. If somebody is using a powerful tool, for example, like rhetoric or like NLP, the most powerful antidote to rhetoric is rhetoric. The most powerful antidote to NLP is NLP. And what I mean by that is, if you can understand the nature of the communication you're in, then what you will be able to do is look for things like fallacies in arguments. For example, if I use what's known as a syllogism, if I take this from rhetoric, a syllogism is deductive logic, and it has a major premise, a minor premise, and a conclusion. So, for example, I could say, all doctors are rich. Sanjay is a doctor. Now, I don't even have to finish that deductive logic to know that the conclusion, therefore, is Sanjay is rich. And logically, that's absolutely 100% correct. The structure of that is 100% correct. The problem is the initial premise is a fallacy, because not all doctors are rich. I could say all teachers are rich. Sanjay is a teacher, therefore Sanjay is rich. And so the deductive logic is absolutely 100% correct. But what we need to be able to do is pick out the fallacies in what is being said to us, so that we can come back and say, well, that's all very well and good, but there's one problem with that statement. Not all doctors are rich. And then you can give a counterexample. Not all teachers are rich. You can give a counterexample, which takes away that influential sentence that's just been said to you. So you can challenge it if you can hear it. If you have the whole thing. By the way, we all used to be taught rhetoric. Everyone in the Western world used to be taught rhetoric. It was free. It was part of the 7 liberal arts. So you had the quadrivium and the trivium, logic, grammar, and momentarily I forget the other. Rhetoric, of course, logic, grammar, and rhetoric. So we were all taught it. And the reason we were taught it is so that we could engage in meaningful civic debate. That's why we were all taught it. And so having access to language helps us have meaningful debate. It also helps us pick out fallacies in other people's arguments as well. And that's to stop us being negatively influenced. So when you talk about influence and negative influence, the best antidote to negative influence is understanding the structure of language and how meaning and beliefs are created, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And something, again, going through our mind as you were talking, right? If you can hear it is what you said, right? But aren't we living in a world where a lot of people aren't hearing these fallacies or these kind of false equivalences or whatever, and therefore they're just accepting what's coming into their world?
And therein lies the problem, that if we're not truth seekers, if we're not listening to understand and say, okay, how does that mean? Or what does that mean? So if somebody says, journalists say that we need to do X, Y, and Z, we can leave journalists as it is, but that's what's known in NLP as a universal quantifier, i.e. all journalists. Like everybody knows that ... If we don't challenge that, then it sounds like everybody knows, but of course that can't be true. Because if you then say everybody, who's everybody? Or they say, and you say, well, who's they? If they say doctors say, so which doctors say, for example? And we're hearing in the language pattern of a universal quantifier, because that's to make that message sound really powerful. Everybody knows. But the moment we challenge it and say, everybody who? I didn't know that. And the moment you have a counterexample, it destroys the universality of everybody knows. Doctors say, well, this doctor doesn't. No longer can you have doctors say. It doesn't work anymore. And so understanding the nature and structure of language and the way that grammar is put together as well gives us access to be able to challenge those things. Because as you say, if the thing about suggestion is that if you do not challenge it, then you accept it. That's the way it works unconsciously. If you don't challenge it, you accept it. So pay attention to what's being said and be curious enough to know or want to know, what does that actually mean? Explain that to me. And to pick out the fallacies.
Steve, how did you find yourself in this world of looking at language models? And was it an interest right from childhood, or is it as you kind of developed your business, your NLP interests and that sort of thing, that's developed?
It developed out of wanting to be an actor. I wanted to be an actor since I can remember, certainly since I was 8 years old. And so I wanted to go to drama school. In fact, I remember a careers officer asking me at school, what do you want to be when you grow up? And I remember saying, I want to be a policeman, a doctor, a fireman, an astronaut, and this whole list of things that I wanted to be. I didn't want to restrict myself to one thing. And I thought, well, how can I be all of those things? And the only way I could think of was to be an actor. And I fell in love with film, movies, and plays and scripts. And then I became really fascinated by the richness of language and how it reveals so much about us. All you have to do is listen to somebody for 5 minutes and you can pretty much get a shape of their map of the world, how they see the world, their values, their beliefs, beliefs about themselves and other people. And all you have to do is pay attention to language. And falling in love with language and walking onto a stage every night, for example, when you're doing a play, and for example, there may be 2,000 people in that audience, and I call it the 9:32 moment. I call it the 9:32 moment. I know when I'm doing a play at 9:32, for example, there'll be 2,000 people in front of me laughing every night of the week. That's 2,000 different people every single night, all laughing at 9:32. And if you just think about what that means for a second, that means whatever is happening on that stage, whatever has been constructed by the director, the actors, the stage managers, the lighting, the music, etc., everything has been designed to have that response in 2,000 individuals in front of you. So the ability to know that you can actually use language in a way that produces a predictable result is incredibly powerful. And how could you not be impressed with the ability to communicate with people in that way, to help people feel what you want them to feel? And that's what we do every night when we're doing a play, for example. You want them to feel maybe sadness here, maybe worry here, and then maybe joy and elation here. But the way you use language and everything else that you're doing, then you can influence those feelings in another person. I mean, for me, that's the definition of magic. That's the definition.
Yeah.
Language gives you access to that.
No, and that's true. That knowing that at that moment in time, everyone's going to laugh and you've designed it that way, it is a very powerful statement. So talking of language, you've also written a book, your 31 practices.
Well, not just my 31 practices.
Okay.
There are more 31 practices, but it's yours too. I mean, hopefully, you can adopt these practices too. Yeah, this is a book on values and understanding what your values are, and then designing behaviors that support your values. And because the idea is if you are behaving in a way that supports your values, you'll be more aligned with who you are. And ultimately, that will make you live a more authentic life, make you be happier and healthier. And so that's the premise really of the book. And it taps into what we've been saying as well, because your values are your key drivers for your behavior. What's important to you? And therefore, still in the scheme of what we're talking about, in terms about being able to communicate in an authentic way, being able to influence people ethically, of course, you do that really by resonating with what's important to people. And so it's all part and parcel of the journey that we're discussing on this call since we started.
Right. Okay. Yeah. As you know, Steve, the podcast is called Success Matters. So what does success mean to you?
That's a very good question. What does success mean to me? Success, I think, ultimately means to me that I am able to live in a way where I feel comfortable within my own skin, where I feel authentic, where I feel I'm in alignment with living the life that's important to me. So I don't equate it so much with earning money, which I know a lot of people do. And that hopefully is a byproduct of living an aligned life and doing things that are important to you. So I think if you can look at yourself and say, yeah, I'm proud of who I am. I can see that my behaviors are in alignment with my values and what's important to me. And I stand up for what I believe is important to me. And where I do compromise, because life will kind of put you in situations where you have to from time to time, that I'm making compromises that I'm okay with and not compromising where I'm not okay. For me, that's success. And seeing my daughter grow up in a happy way where I can see that she's 15 at the moment and see that the joy of life and the ambition for what comes next, because of course it's generational. And then you start talking about legacy. And I think the legacy of living an aligned life is hopefully passing that on to, for example, your children and so on. So I think that's success for me.
Mm. Yeah, I think the values part is really, really important, because that's, well, certainly for me, right? It's once I decided to think about, well, what's important to me from a values perspective and started to live my life accordingly, that put a lot of things, it's almost like a domino effect. Lots of things kind of lined up then as a result of that. Whereas before, not necessarily being aware of the values and therefore not necessarily designing a life built around that, almost felt like you're kind of just living a life, right, without really having a purpose or a meaning to it. So for me, the values statement really resonates.
Yeah, I think purpose is everything, really, because if you don't have purpose, you're directionless. If you don't have an intention that you're following, where are you going? And, what's the point of what you're doing? Because if you feel like everything you're doing is helping you move towards a greater purpose or a greater intention, it gives meaning to almost everything you do. So I think that's really important.
Yeah, exactly. So a tradition I have, which I've borrowed from a very famous Diary of a CEO podcast, is to ask a previous guest for a question for my next guest. And so the previous guest has asked me, it kind of ties into what we've just been talking about, is what is your key driver for success?
Key driver for success. I think my key driver for success is vision. What I mean by that is kind of exactly what we've just been talking about. That if you can visualize the life that you want to lead, if you can visualize or connect with what your mission is all about, then that gives you the direction we've been talking about. That makes sense of everything you do. And so I think I would say is having a vision, being clear about what you want. I think the most important question for all of us is what's your intention? What's our intention? What's my intention? And there's a greater intention, which is if you like, the purpose. And there's the intention of all these mini steps that you do along your life that move you in that direction. So I think being clear on intention and purpose are probably the key factors behind success for me.
Okay. And when you say intention, what do you mean by that?
So anything you do, why are you doing it? Mm-hmm. It's your why. Yeah. So it's your why for your life. And it's also your why for every step that you take. So if, doing this podcast, for example, the most important question for me is, why am I doing it? Why? What's the point? Mm-hmm. No point. I'll just be sat here. I'd probably be actually in a cold shower, actually cooling down. But actually, that I need to have a reason to be sitting here having a chat with you, Sanjay. I need to have a reason for doing it. And even if that reason is to, just to connect with you and just, to share some thoughts, that's a great reason. But also, hopefully there's going to be a lot of people watching this podcast and somebody will take something from it that will help them to think about something differently and make a difference to them. And so there's a purpose. I think that's a really powerful thing for this kind of forum. So I think the intention is, why are you doing what you're doing? And for me, the intention question is, how does that fit into your bigger picture? Every intention has an intention. Every goal in your life has a goal. You want to achieve a certain promotion, for example. There's always a reason. Why would you want that? What would that then bring you? How would that then be linked to something else? There's always a goal beyond the goal. There's always an intention beyond the intention. But we do need to have intention, I believe, to be moving forward in our lives rather than doing nothing. I talk about it. I think about it like popcorn. You put popcorn in a microwave, for example, and then when that popcorn explodes, all that energy goes off. There's a huge amount of energy, and because it's going off in all directions, it's going up, down, left, right, everywhere. There's no net movement. There's a huge amount of energy, but no net movement because it's going all over the place. But you take exactly the same amount of energy and you direct that to something, an intention, you direct that towards something, and then all that energy, same amount of energy, now becomes like a jet engine. And now you really do have movement. So you can put the same amount of effort in and go nowhere, or the same or less amount of energy and really go somewhere. And that's about intention. That's about where you head, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's a great analogy. That's a brilliant analogy, the popcorn analogy. I'm going to borrow that, Steve, for future conversations that I have.
So that's okay. So you do
that. We're paying it forward, right? That's what we're doing. We're paying it forward. Do you have a question for my next guest?
Yes. Again, we'll pick up on this theme, really. When it comes to the bigger picture of your life, so, we talk about context, we talk about work, we talk about health, we talk about relationships, but then overall, in terms of the general context of life. So it's kind of part A and part B to the question. First of all, when you consider your life as a whole, now many things will be important to you, but what would be the top 5, if it's not too many to think about, the top 5 most important things to you, the most important values that you have, the top 5 values for your life. And once you've got those top 5 values out, take a look at them. Make sure that you understand what those words, so it might be, I don't know, it might be love, might be one of them. What does that mean? So define them. Now, this is quite a big question. So you might want to shorten this on the question to the next, to the top 3, and then just define the top 1, perhaps. Define it, and then ask yourself the following 2 questions. What are you doing that supports it? And what are you doing that works against it, if anything? So let's make that easier for your next guest. So what's your top most important life value? And then what are you doing towards it? What are you doing that might be working against it? And you might not want them to reveal the second part of that question. They can just think that. Keep it
okay. That's a good question. And well, it's a multitude of questions in one question, which is I was literally just thinking, okay, how will I phrase that? But you've summarized it for me nicely there. So that's what I would ask.
Somebody's going to be sat in my seat. Now they've got to think of 5, and then if I know too much, top line. What are you doing that supports it? What are you doing that maybe, rhetorical question, this one, that maybe works against it?
What's your top value that you're working towards? And if you don't mind answering, what are you doing that's not supporting it?
I think my top value is freedom. And that's a recurring theme that comes up time and time again, and that it's interesting how we can define what freedom means in different contexts as well. So I think freedom is possibly my top value. I was going to say justice as another one, but I'm gonna put freedom on top. Freedom. What do I do that works for it? I spend my life traveling. I don't think there's ever a month where I'm not traveling, if not once, many times. And part of that big expression of freedom for me is to be able to experience the world. So I travel all over the world. I love being in different cultures. I love learning about different cultures. And I feel an immense sense of freedom when I'm able to connect with this planet by having touch points around it. So for me, that's a big expression of the kind of freedom, one definition of freedom for me. What do I do that works against it? Sometimes, so it's interesting because we can have values conflicts where we can have one of our values being freedom, for example, and the other being perhaps making money so that you can afford to have some freedom. And often they can work against each other because the more you have to make money, the less freedom you feel you have. So I suppose sometimes I get myself very busy. And maybe that then actually, even though I'm doing it to have more freedom, the irony is that actually in doing it, I can often have less freedom.
Mm. I know the feeling. I've been there. I've been there this summer in my busyness of doing things, which has felt like I haven't had the freedom. But then I suppose that moment has given me now freedom down the line. So I get that. Yeah. We're kind of towards the top of our time now, Steve. So if people want to find out more about what you do, to ask you questions, read your book, whatever, what's the best way for them to contact you?
Yeah, so they can contact me via the website. It's probably the easiest way, or LinkedIn. So the website would be www.taoct, Tango Alpha Oscar Charlie Tango.uk, which stands for the Academy of Coaching and Training, www.taoct.uk, or contact me directly via LinkedIn, which is probably the best way to get hold of me. So Steve Payne, LinkedIn, do a search. The ACT will probably be the easiest way to get hold of me.
It's been a very fascinating conversation. In a very short space of time, we've covered a lot of ground here. And I almost feel like I've been in a one-on-one coaching situation here with you, Steve, which has been fantastic. So thank you very much for your time. I hope you've enjoyed it as much as I have.
Loved it. And thank you again, Sanjay. Always a pleasure to talk with you. And these things, you could go on for hours. Well, I certainly could. So it's probably best for your viewers that we find a finish point. So that's great.
Phil, to find your success, contact me at info@successmatterscoaching.com. That's info@successmatterscoaching.com.